A sniper is on the loose on Long Island. His random pattern leaves investigators with only one clue: the ammunition he uses to hunt total strangers. Investigators in Kentucky try to determine the fate of a woman who has disappeared. Her family suspects the worst, but there are no clues, no motive, and no crime scene. In Georgia, a young man is shot to death on a fishing trip. Police find the body of his fiancée 7 miles downstream. But spent bullets are the only clues the killer left behind. In a fraction of a second, a single bullet can shatter many lives. But forensic scientists can decipher clues etched in lead when innocent victims are caught in the line of fire. In this episode, some of the names have been changed to protect the identity of the victims and their families.
How is everything?
Everything's fine, thank you.
On July 22nd, 1994, Sharon Chaffetz joined her husband Stephen for a late dinner at a Long Island restaurant. After many years of marriage, they were looking forward to their daughter's wedding, just 2 weeks away. Suddenly, the window near Stephen's head shattered, and he slumped to the floor. The restaurant owner quickly called for help. Suffolk County, New York police and paramedics responded to the call within minutes. But it was too late. Stephen Chaffetz was dead from a single gunshot wound to the chest. No one in the restaurant had seen the shooter. Police processed the crime scene for clues. The trajectory of the bullet suggested that someone had fired a high-powered rifle at the restaurant from an area across the street. No one knew whether the shooting was random or if Chaffetz had been targeted for murder. Lieutenant John Girash of the Suffolk County Police Department led the investigation. He started by looking into the victim's background.
In most homicide investigations, one of the first things that detectives do is to try to learn as much as they can about the victim. Most often, the motive lies within the life of the victim and what's going on with him.
Investigators spoke with the victim's family and friends.
Has he had any contact with any other?
Stephen Chaffetz, a practicing attorney and a CPA, was highly regarded in the community. According to those close to him, he had no enemies. Investigators were perplexed. Why would someone want to kill Stephen Chaffetz? At autopsy, the coroner recovered a .35 caliber bullet, a type most commonly used in high-powered rifles. It was sent to the ballistics lab for further testing. 4 days later, 23-year-old Andy Gomez was working his shift inside the cashier's booth at a nearby gas station. Without warning, a single shot rang out. The booth's window was double insulated and bulletproof. Gomez was lucky to be alive. Within minutes, police secured the area. They found no trace of the shooter. Gomez had little information to offer police. There had been no attempted robbery, and he didn't see anyone prior to the shooting. The bullet, which fragmented upon impact with the bulletproof glass, was all the shooter left behind. Police collected the fragments and sent them to the lab. The MO for both attacks was identical.
bag number 1. Item number 1.
Police hoped ballistics analysis could tell them more. After noting the similarities between the two shootings, investigators working the Chaffetz murder shifted their focus.
The investigation became more complicated because it was obvious to us that the motive had very little to do, if anything, to do with the two individuals. Rather, these were now appearing to be random acts. And it's those kinds of random acts that make these kinds of investigation most difficult.
The metal fragments from the gas station were sent to the Suffolk County Crime Lab. Although they were too small to compare to the bullet recovered from the body of Stephen Chaffetz, scientists were able to determine their metallic content. A visual inspection under a microscope revealed the bullets shared a common coloration. The fragments from the gas station and the bullet that killed Chaffetz both had copper jackets. It was the first small step in linking the two shootings. But examiners could not say with certainty that the bullets were fired from the same weapon. On August 3rd, a week after the gas station shooting, 42-year-old single mother Kelly Spate was finishing her shift at a local fast food restaurant. A single shot ripped through the window, hitting Kelly. The manager called 911. Suffolk County Police were dispatched to the scene. The victim was badly injured, but still alive. The single bullet passed through her arm and then through her chest, barely missing her vital organs. Police secured the area and interviewed the restaurant's manager. Neither he nor any of the restaurant patrons had seen the shooter. The bullet was found lodged in the wall. Despite the frustrating lack of eyewitnesses in all three cases, the police had an intact bullet for comparison. Forensic specialists examined the evidence at the Suffolk County Crime Lab. The .35 caliber slug was the same size as the bullet that killed Stephen Chaffetz. The two bullets were examined side by side under a high-powered comparison microscope. Each gun has a set of markings inside the barrel called lands and grooves. These markings are etched into the bullet as it travels down the barrel, leaving a series of ridges behind. These ridges are similar to fingerprints in that no two weapons leave identical lands and grooves. When the ridges from both bullets were analyzed, they matched. Lab examiners had finally provided investigators with solid proof that the shootings were related.
They told us unequivocally that that bullet and the murder bullet from the first incident were fired from one and the same weapon. That told us as much as anything else. These were all related cases, and with that, likely at the hands of one individual.
Police had no idea how or when the shooter would strike next. And according to Assistant Chief John McAlone of the Suffolk County Police Department, there were no viable suspects.
We didn't have anyone to really concentrate on, or any even small group to concentrate on. So the major obstacle in this case was identity. Who could it be? Who was it? And how could we stop him? How could we prove a case against him?
As news of the random shooting spread, the community panicked. The press dubbed the unknown assailant the Suffolk Sniper. Investigators feared they were dealing with a madman who shot total strangers for the sheer thrill of the hunt. Suffolk County Police continued their search for an elusive sniper. One man was already dead, and two others had narrowly escaped his deadly aim. Investigators were baffled.
There was nothing similar about our victims. This presented almost a nightmare investigatively to detectives because it doesn't give you any direction to start with.
Investigators began by compiling a list of individuals who owned .35 caliber rifles. They also searched police records for recently arrested individuals charged with gun-related crimes. Publishers of various survivalist magazines were asked to send in lists of subscribers from the Long Island area. Police canvassed neighborhoods in the vicinity of the shootings. But residents reported they had not noticed any suspicious activity. Patrol officers set up roadblocks and conducted interviews with thousands of motorists. After several months, investigators had entered over 200,000 names into a database specially modified for the investigation. From these names, Sergeant Edward Light culled 600 strong leads.
We're looking for people that appeared more than once. For example, if they held a hunting license and they subscribed to a survivalist magazine and perhaps were on parole, that would raise a flag to the investigators.
The Suffolk County Police Department mobilized every available resource to find the killer. The massive police presence in the area of the shootings also helped to calm the fearful community.
They visibly saw a lot more patrol cars than they used to. They saw the helicopter overhead more than likely. They saw the canine units all deployed within a certain area, of a narrow area of maybe 9 or 10 miles.
Police were desperate to generate leads. After developing a psychological portrait of the sniper, they appealed to the public for assistance. A detailed analysis of the crime scenes revealed a familiar pattern to investigators. They described the shooter as a white male in his mid-20s to early 30s, probably a gun lover and an avid hunter. The tactics soon paid off. Police received a call from a parole officer. One of his parolees, a man named Peter Sylvester, fit the profile of the shooter. Sylvester had an extensive criminal record, including convictions for the possession of stolen weapons, and he lived close to where the 3 shootings had occurred. Investigators decided to put him under surveillance.
We had come to know that he was on parole, and with his parole were certain conditions that he had to meet. Our surveillance was telling us that he was violating those conditions.
Within a matter of days, Sylvester was observed violating the curfew mandated in his parole. He was arrested and brought in for questioning. At the time of his arrest, Sylvester was in possession of a 9mm handgun. When asked about the sniper incidents, he denied any involvement. Police ran the serial number of the 9mm. They learned the weapon had been reported stolen from a local sports shop. Sylvester was booked for multiple parole violations, including possession of a stolen weapon. Although there was little evidence that he was the sniper, police considered him a prime suspect.
How you doing?
To learn more, investigators tracked down Sylvester's former employer. He told them that Sylvester had left a .410 gauge shotgun in the back of his delivery truck. Police collected the shotgun as evidence. They also continued to check all gun-related leads. One such lead led detectives to a mental hospital. There, they spoke to a man who had threatened to commit suicide with a high-powered rifle. The patient told investigators that the rifle was a .356 Remington. Although it was not the type of rifle used in the shootings, the patient offered investigators one intriguing piece of information. He told them he had purchased the rifle from a friend, a man named Peter Sylvester. Police ran the serial number on the patient's gun. It had been stolen from a local gun shop 2 weeks before the shootings began. During this robbery, 2 other guns were also taken, a .35 caliber Whelan rifle and a .410 gauge shotgun. The serial number of the stolen shotgun was compared to the one recovered from Sylvester's employer. They matched. The third stolen weapon, the .35 caliber rifle, was consistent with the rifle used to kill Stephen Chaffetz. But that gun was still missing.
And that third weapon, that unaccounted for weapon, fit almost exactly the description of the weapon that we were seeking as the murder weapon.
2 of the 3 stolen guns had been linked to Sylvester. It seemed likely that he was also connected to the missing .35 caliber rifle. Now, investigators needed to prove that the missing rifle was the murder weapon. They visited the manager of the gun shop where the robbery occurred. Sales records indicated the .35 caliber rifle in question had been sold to the shop by a previous owner. Police asked for the address. At this point, investigators had but one hope, that the prior owner still had spent bullets from the rifle in his possession.
Would that be the last one?
If so, those bullets could be compared to the ones recovered from the crime scenes.
Please go ahead and give us a call.
The former owner told investigators that he remembered firing practice shots into a tree during hunting season, but that was a year ago. If he could find that tree, investigators might have the evidence they needed. Suffolk County homicide detective Kevin Cronin was optimistic.
He said he had hunted that mountain for about 20 years. He felt very confident that he could find the tree. His confidence rubbed off on us, and we went up there, myself and our investigative team.
Officers followed the man into the woods. He led them straight to the tree he had once used for target practice. Noting several bullet holes, officers cut the tree down. They sent a cross-section of the trunk to the Suffolk County Crime Lab. In the lab, the sections were cut open. Several bullets were recovered. Examiners could now compare these to the bullets recovered from the body of Stephen Chaffetz. The characteristics of both sets of bullets matched. Investigators had successfully used a missing rifle to link their suspect to the murder. They were slowly building their case against Peter Sylvester. A warrant was obtained to search the house Sylvester lived in with his mother. Officers believed the weapon was somewhere in the house. They checked everywhere. Hidden in the ceiling, police finally found the .35 caliber Whelan rifle. It was now up to the Suffolk County Crime Lab to prove Sylvester was the Suffolk sniper. In the lab, the rifle was fired into a water tank. The bullet was then recovered for comparison with bullets fired by the Suffolk sniper. Under the microscope, ridges on the test bullet matched the ridges on the bullet that killed Stephen Chaffetz. Without a doubt, the .35 caliber Whelan rifle was the weapon used in the shootings. Faced with the overwhelming evidence against him, Sylvester confessed to the shootings.
Did you kill those people? Yes.
He acknowledged he had never met any of his victims. From a secluded position, he waited for an easy target. He lined them up in his sights and fired. Peter Sylvester was found guilty of murder and received a sentence of 35 years to life. No motive was ever established.
If we weren't able to solve this case for an indefinite period of time, the residents would have to go about with a bunker mentality. They'd have to pull down their shades at night. They'd have to look over their shoulders as they went about their daily routine. We were able to eliminate that circumstance, and Suffolk County, as it was before this incident, remains an extremely safe place to live.
Peter Sylvester did not know his victims. But in Kentucky, murder became a more personal matter. The serene landscape of Dry Ridge, Kentucky, hardly seems the place for a terrible crime. Then again, maybe it's the perfect place. On September 16, 1988, the parents of 28-year-old Paula Doherty reported her missing to the state police. In this rural area, the state police handle most investigations. Paula's parents hadn't heard from her for 2 days. It wasn't like her not to contact them or her children. Paula Doherty, a divorced mother of 2, lived at her parents' house. She had been dating a man named Nathan Marksberry for 6 months and had been spending a lot of time with him. When Nathan heard that Paula was missing, he called the state police to offer his help, though he said he didn't know where she might be. Still, police wanted to meet with him for an interview. They drove to his trailer, located on his parents' farm. He told them that the last time he'd seen her was in the early hours of September 15th, 3 days earlier. They were at a club with some friends. It was closing time, and their friends had left. Marksberry told police that Paula had called someone to come pick her up. He didn't know why, and she wouldn't say. They waited outside.
How you doing?
Eventually, a woman in a yellow or tan car pulled
You
up.
gotta take care of her, right?
Paula introduced her as Shelley or Sheila. He'd never seen her before. Then they drove off, and Nathan went home by himself.
He was yellow, the car.
Marksberry said the woman was either a cousin or a friend from Cincinnati. Paula didn't seem upset. It was all very mysterious. Investigators thought so too. Sergeant Ron Harrison learned that it was out of character for Paula to simply up and leave without telling anyone.
Prior to her disappearance, the last family member that she talked to was her mother, who she called from the bar. At her about 10 or 10:30 that night, and didn't indicate to her mother at that time that she was getting ready to call anybody to come and get her. She didn't indicate that she wanted her mother to try to make arrangements to have somebody come and get her or anything of that nature.
Investigators spoke to the other friends who were with Paula that night.
Sergeant Harrison?
Yes.
Each admitted leaving before Paula and Nathan did.
Sheila Quinn.
And all of them said the evening didn't end on a pleasant note. When they left the bar at closing time, everything was fine. But then, in the parking lot, Marksberry grew upset over losing his keys. One of the friends tried to calm him down, and Marksberry hit him. Sergeant Harrison retraced the couple's footsteps, but found nothing in the bar parking lot.
As a result of that altercation, all of these individuals at or about the same time left the parking lot. The only vehicle left on this parking lot after that time was Nathan Marksbury's vehicle, and the only people who were here on this parking lot at that time was Nathan and Paula. And this is the last time that we've been able to establish anyone seeing Paula.
Sergeant Harrison could find out nothing else about what happened that night. But witnesses claimed that in the past, they had observed Marksbury being physically abusive with girlfriends. If he had been violent with Paula, she hadn't said a word. State police had only two facts to work with: a dependable woman who disappeared unexpectedly, and her boyfriend, who witnesses said was abusive. Though Nathan Marksbury was now the prime suspect in Paula's disappearance, there wasn't a shred of evidence linking him to any wrongdoing. Investigators' hands were tied. Though it seemed unlikely, it was even possible that Paula had vanished of her own free will. Paula's family wasn't keeping idle. Desperate for answers, they searched for clues on the Marksbury's farm. It caused some problems.
The Marksbury family were talking to me, answering questions, assisting me in any way that they could in attempting to find Paula. And I didn't want that compromised, and they were not happy with the Doherty family being on their property at the same time. As a result, we had to talk to the Doherty family and explain to them that although they had the right to conduct a search, they did not have a right to come onto the Marksbury property.
The investigation into Paula's whereabouts continued, with interviews of Paula's friends and the Marksbury's neighbors. One neighbor said she might have seen Paula with Nathan after the couple left the bar. Nathan had knocked at their door that night. He said he wanted to party with them. It was late, and it was peculiar. They'd never socialized with Nathan before, nor did they want to now.
They refused to party with him. They did not see Paula Doherty with him, but they saw the silhouette of what they took to be a female in the car, but they could not identify that individual because they didn't get out of the car. And then Nathan left their residence, and they never saw him or Paula later that night.
It was just another vague clue, but it indicated that Nathan had not gone home alone that night, as he said he did. Other stories were equally vague and equally compelling. Many neighbors, including a state police officer, had seen Nathan working on the farm after Paula disappeared. He tended a fire at the farm's trash dump for 4 or 5 days. Then he was seen churning the smoldering debris. Neighbors commented that for Nathan to do any sort of physical labor at all was unusual. He was rarely seen working on the farm.
It's just a big open pit.
For investigators, Nathan's actions were suspicious.
His behavior was not consistent with the Nathan that we all had come to know. Nathan would not get out and do something like that just in order to clean up the farm. Couple that with the fact that all of the leads about where Paula might be had wound up with nothing. I was really interested in knowing what Nathan was doing, what he was burying in that dump.
Despite their suspicions, authorities had no basis for a search warrant. They had no legal right to enter the property. Marksbury was free to continue destroying potential evidence. "28-year-old Paula Doherty was missing, presumed dead. Paula's boyfriend, Nathan Marksbury, had been seen burning trash on his parents' farm in the days following her disappearance. Kentucky investigators believed Marksbury was destroying evidence, but their best lead was really no more than a hunch. To test their theory, they needed to check Marksbury's trash pile, but they had no warrant. So they tried the direct approach. They asked his father for permission. To their great relief, he gave his consent to search the grounds, just so long as they didn't disturb anything or enter buildings. Anticipating what they might find, the state police brought with them a forensic anthropologist trained to recognize human remains, even when they're tiny shards. At the dump site, that's just what he found. Fragments of human bones.
At that time, I stopped the search, secured the dump site, and obtained a search warrant.
The warrant allowed the state police forensics team just a few days to search the dump site. Because of the size of the site and the burnt and broken condition of the remains, they needed every minute. Parts were sifted and sorted. Some were large and easy to spot. Others were barely recognizable. Once police had gathered as much as they could find, the remains were sent to the central facility of the Kentucky State Forensics Lab. The lab has the capacity to flesh out a case based on the smallest of clues. It's here that an apparently insignificant fragment can become a crucial piece of evidence. Crimes happen elsewhere, but they're often solved here. The forensic anthropologist must literally put the pieces back together to try to get a picture of the victim's identity and to determine what happened. According to Kentucky State forensic anthropologist Dr. Emily Craig, it requires patience and a little soap and water.
When we first get the bones in the lab, the first thing we have to do is clean them up. And we have to get all the debris and soft tissue off of them. And we really have to resort to a procedure we call thermal maceration, but what it amounts to is dishwashing liquid in a crock pot.
The cleaned bones are then laid out to see if they are from a single individual. It isn't easy. Fire and mishandling take their toll on fragile bones. It takes an expert eye to recognize and understand how they can be distorted.
Part of the problem with burned and fragmented skeletal remains is sometimes a 6-foot individual can be reduced to nothing more than the bones you find here in this box. They change size, they change shape, they change color, they break from the fire, but you can still go through the ashes and find enough bones in most cases to make an identification of the victim and identify the trauma.
Ultimately, the forensics lab had enough to work with. From the pelvis and the size of the bones, it was determined that these were the remains of one female individual. Now they had to prove it was Paula Doherty. To make the identification, the lab relied on the victim's teeth, most of which were recovered from Marksbury's farm. Teeth usually survive even the most intense fires, and they're small enough to avoid being crushed by a killer's mishandling. The records matched the dental remains. Paula Doherty had been found. But finding the body didn't necessarily prove homicide. In fact, once the remains were identified, Nathan Marksbury contacted police to say that Paula shot herself, and he disposed of the body because he felt no one would believe that. Law enforcement didn't believe it, but Sergeant Harrison was afraid a jury might.
You work an investigation not to meet the burden of charging someone. You work an investigation to meet the burden of a conviction that will stand up on appeal. And it was a concern throughout because there was no crime scene per se, there was no physical evidence per se other than Paula's remains.
Marksbury said Paula had shot herself in the head. He gave police the gun she'd allegedly used. There were no fingerprints found. it was impossible for the Kentucky State Police to determine whether she had been the one to fire it. If investigators were going to find grounds for a murder conviction, they would have to rely on the remains alone. The forensics lab began the meticulous process of piecing together the fragments of skull collected from the dump site. It was grossly incomplete, but the important parts were there, revealing not one, but 2 gunshot wounds. They told a lot. Though both shots penetrated the skull, neither was necessarily fatal. The victim might have fired both bullets and bled to death. To test the suicide theory, investigators needed to determine the trajectory of the bullets. Dr. Craig inserted rods into the bullet holes in the victim's skull to ascertain the position of the weapon. She found that Paula could not possibly have positioned the gun to her own head at those angles. Someone else had fired the gun.
Nathan Marksberry, you're being
Police
arrested.
believe that person was Nathan Marksberry. He had the gun. He attempted to destroy the body. Based on the evidence, he was arrested for the murder of Paula Doherty. Nathan Marksberry was sentenced to life in prison, plus an additional 15 years for tampering with evidence. Investigators theorized that on September 15th, Nathan's anger raged out of control. He murdered Paula, then tried to cover up his crime. Marksberry's violent temper found a target in the person closest to him. Harder to catch is a killer whose rage is unleashed on total strangers. Waycross, Georgia, May 30th, 1993. Ray Hampton and Jean Dixon were worried. Both of their teenagers, 18-year-old Charlie Dixon and 19-year-old Jason Hampton, were missing. The high school sweethearts had gone on a fishing trip the day before and had not returned. It was not like Jason to forget to call. The 2 men drove to their kids' favorite fishing location on the Satilla River. Ray Hampton spotted Jason's truck. Their worst fears quickly became a reality. Ray found the body of his son face down in the dirt. The boy had been shot several times. Jean Dixon's daughter, Charlie, was nowhere to be found. After finding his son murdered on the bank of a Georgia river, Ray Hampton radioed the Ware County Sheriff's Department. His son's young fiancée was still missing. Police cordoned off the entire area and carefully processed the crime scene. They searched for anything that might point to the killer. Jason Hampton had been shot in the back. Several .22 caliber bullet casings were recovered from the ground near his body. Jason's truck was thoroughly dusted for prints, but none were found. His fishing poles were missing. Police also searched the riverbank for evidence. Still, there was no sign of Charlie Dixon. Local police called the Georgia Bureau of Investigation for assistance. Special Agent Bill Butler took the call.
We knew at that time that we had a major case on our hands. We had a young man who had been brutally murdered, and we had another teenage girl who was missing. Certainly there was a great deal of concern on all of our parts to find her and to find the perpetrator.
Investigators split up into teams to search for Charlie Dixon in the wooded areas along the Satilla River. She was nowhere to be found. But investigators refused to give up hope that they would find the young woman. 7 miles upstream from where Jason's body was found, officers made a tragic discovery. They found the nude body of Charlie Dixon. Like her boyfriend, she had been shot several times.
It appears to us in the investigation that the sequence of events that occurred was that after Jason was shot and killed at the scene, that Charlie Dixon was also shot, and she was taken from the scene and was taken to the wooded area in the north part of the county near the Pebble Hill community.
In less than 2 hours, police were processing their second murder scene. The killer had left behind few clues. No shoe prints or tire tracks were found. Looking for valuable evidence, police collected everything they could find at the scene. Charlie Dixon's body was taken to the coroner for further examination. The coroner determined that Charlie Dixon had been sexually assaulted. Investigators hoped they would be able to extract and identify the killer's DNA from the biological evidence collected. The swabs were sent to the Georgia State Crime Lab for analysis. Forensic biologist John Wagle examined the evidence.
When you run the DNA test on the swabs, the first thing you determine is there enough material DNA present to continue with the test? And yes, there was.
The DNA was viable, but police had no suspects to compare it with. They knew they would have to work quickly.
The critical time in any major investigation is the first 7 to 8 hours of the investigation. So that's when you're going to do the most important work that you do in an investigation. That includes the crime scene investigation. It includes your initial interviews with victims' friends and families, and where you're going to find out the most important information in the case that will hopefully lead you to a solution.
Hoping to find a lead, police interviewed the victim's parents. The Hamptons and the Dixons told investigators that their kids were well liked by their peers and had never been in any trouble. Charlie, a high school senior, was looking forward to graduation. She and Jason, a freshman in college, had just gotten engaged. The parents told investigators that on the morning of May 30th, Jason picked up Charlie to go fishing. They planned to spend the entire day at the Satilla River. That was the last time they were seen alive. The bullets from the double homicide were sent to the GBI ballistics lab for analysis. The lands and grooves on each of the bullets matched. This verified what officers already suspected. Charlie Dixon and Jason Hampton had been shot with the same gun, a .22 caliber Remington rifle. Police had their first solid lead.
As we began to proceed in this investigation, we felt sure that a speedy solution would come about because we had ballistics evidence and we had DNA evidence.
But they still needed a suspect and a weapon to make a comparison. With no obvious motive, the murders seemed to be the random acts of a stranger. Investigators feared that each day this killer roamed free, more people would die.
I know that all of us felt the need to get it solved as quickly as possible before another crime occurred. And when we looked at the brutality of these crimes, we knew that there was a potential there for other people to be victimized.
The Georgia Bureau of Investigation teamed up with area law enforcement agencies. Every department was asked to submit reports of recently investigated violent crimes.
As we conducted our investigation, we began to look at people who had records for similar crimes. And what we looked at was for any suspect who had a record for either sexual assault, kidnapping, or burglary.
Hundreds of potential suspects were interviewed. 60 voluntarily gave DNA samples. The samples were sent to the GBI lab for comparison. None of the DNA samples matched the biological evidence collected from Charlie Dixon's body.
Yes.
The investigation stalled.
So it's been in your possession all week? Yes.
And as time went on, we certainly began to get frustrated because we really developed no suspects that warranted any further investigation into. And certainly we were beginning to doubt whether we would solve this case.
By December of 1993, nearly 7 months had passed since the murders. Agents from the Georgia Bureau of Investigations were no closer to catching the killer. Investigators in Waycross, Georgia struggled to solve the brutal double murder of 2 high school sweethearts. The list of potential suspects climbed to over 1,000. Identifying the killer would take time.
And patience was the name of the game. And we preached it every day in our task force meetings, to be patient, to keep proceeding, to follow every lead, to document everything, and to keep going ahead until we found the perpetrator of these brutal murders.
Their patience paid off. Investigators finally got a break. It came from a local jail. Authorities told agents about a prisoner who was recently placed in custody for violating his parole. The man had threatened to kill his mother and brother with a rifle. His name was Billy Daniel Rollerson. A background check revealed that Rollerson was on parole after serving time on a burglary conviction.
Where have you been last week?
Investigators questioned Rollerson about the murders.
No? You ever been down there?
He denied any knowledge of them.
Would you be willing to take
Before leaving, investigators asked for a blood sample.
All right.
Rollerson consented. At the GBI crime lab, scientists extracted DNA from Rollerson's blood sample. The results of the DNA test revealed banding patterns unique to each donor. The banding patterns from Rollerson's DNA were then compared to those taken from Charlie Dixon's body. Computer analysis statistically confirmed they matched.
No more than 1 in 10 billion individuals could have that pattern, and that with a reasonable scientific certainty, the DNA from the biological material on the swab originated from Mr. Rollerson.
All right, let's search this for you.
Police obtained a search warrant for Rollerson's home. There, they found 2 fishing poles. One was identified as belonging to Jason Hampton. They also found a dismantled rifle, a .22 caliber Remington Model 66. Police hoped it was consistent with the weapon used in the murders. The confiscated rifle was reassembled and sent to the ballistics lab for testing. The rifle was fired into a vertical water tank. The water stops the velocity of the bullet without damaging the projectile, leaving the lands and grooves intact for comparison. Examination confirmed without a doubt that the bullets that killed each of the victims had been fired with this rifle. Faced with this evidence, Rollerson confessed.
Conclusive proof that you raped and murdered Charlie Dixon.
He told investigators that he stalked Jason and Charlie during their fishing trip. When the couple got into the truck, he shot Jason Hampton. He later raped and murdered Charlie Dixon. On March 5, 1994, Billy Daniel Rawlerson was sentenced to die in Georgia's electric chair. When a gun is used to commit murder, bullets can provide the strongest evidence of a killer's guilt. Using advances in forensic science, investigators can read clues etched in lead to find justice for innocent victims who have fallen in the line of fire. A young mother is found murdered near her Indiana home. Investigators have only one piece of evidence to help them find her killer. When a female body is discovered along the banks of an Alabama river, detectives must rely on a few tiny shreds of evidence to make their case. In New York, a woman is found dead at the bottom of a flight of stairs. Police must determine if her death is a suicide or murder. When there are no eyewitnesses to a murder, investigators look to the physical evidence to make their case. Forensic examiners seek out that one clue that can break a case wide open, a clue known as the silent witness. Named for the river flowing through its center, Elkhart, Indiana epitomizes the ideal of small-town America. It's a quiet, close-knit community, a place unfamiliar with the problems of violent crime. On March 3, 1992, a concerned father entered the Elkhart Police Department to file a missing persons report.
My daughter, her name is
Ruben Hernandez hadn't heard from his daughter in nearly 15 hours. 25-year-old Sandra Hernandez had dropped off her 3-year-old son around 5 p.m. the previous evening. Ruben believed that Sandra had a date that night. After saying her goodbyes, Sandra promised she would be back in a couple of hours to pick him up.
Okay.
Ruben and his wife were always happy to spend time with their only grandson, and they were glad to see that Sandra was starting to enjoy her life again. She had recently ended a turbulent 4-year relationship with her child's possessive father. Ruben explained that when he went to check on Sandra at her apartment, he got no response, though her car was still parked out front.
One particular guy that's been giving her a hard time.
Mr. Hernandez's concerns prompted Elkhart Police Lieutenant Tom Cutler to forego the 24-hour waiting period required before opening a missing persons investigation.
He's a fellow who was very concerned about not only his grandchild who he was taking care of, but also his missing daughter, and he knew that she wouldn't take off and leave the child without touching base with him.
After distributing Sandra's description to area law enforcement agencies, police quickly contacted her ex-boyfriend.
Did you guys argue?
Sean Parks strongly denied any knowledge of Sandra's disappearance.
Stuff about the kid, you know.
Why did you bring up something really like
But he admitted that his 4-year relationship with her had been rocky. He said that recently, he and Sandra had been arguing frequently, and sometimes violently. Mostly, they fought over custody of their son. Sandra vowed she would never give up her child.
What did you guys talk
But despite the tensions, Parks insisted he would never hurt Sandra or their son.
Confrontation with Sandra. What were you doing Sunday night?
On the night Sandra disappeared, he claimed he was at work.
Friends. Okay, with some friends. Okay.
Though Parks was cooperative, Investigators know from experience that custody battles can sometimes end in murder.
We checked with work and he was there all night and didn't leave the premise. So we had no reason to believe that he had interacted with Sandra Hernandez on that night.
With the only obvious suspect eliminated, investigators had to consider that Sandra might have left town on her own volition. And though that seemed unlikely, they had to be certain. They went to her residence to search for answers. What they found only supported their suspicions that the young mother had met with foul play. None of Sandra's clothes seemed to be missing, and her luggage was still neatly stored in her closet.
Hey, Jim.
In the kitchen, detectives found a container filled with $230 in cash.
Driver's license.
Sandra's driver's license was also in the tin, with several other personal papers. Police saw no evidence to suggest that she had simply packed up and left town.
I don't think she was going anywhere.
Her neighbors later stated that they had not seen or heard Sandra at her apartment since she left to drop off her son the night she disappeared. With each passing hour, investigators realized that the chances of finding Sandra unharmed grew slimmer. They needed to determine if Sandra had in fact been on a date the night she disappeared, and if so, with whom. Sandra's friend, who worked with her at a door manufacturing company, came in to answer questions. She hadn't noticed anything unusual about Sandra's demeanor in recent days.
How long has he been with the company?
In fact, the night she disappeared, Sandra was excited about a date she was going on with a coworker.
Pushing the issue for quite a while.
The man, Ricky Joyner, was a delivery driver at the company.
Right.
And had been friends with Sandra for some time. When contacted by police, Joyner volunteered to come answer questions. Investigators immediately noticed fresh scratches on his face and hands. Joyner claimed a door falling on him at work caused the injuries. He admitted that he had been out with Sandra the night she disappeared, but only as friends. He said he picked her up at 6 p.m. They had dinner and then went to a movie that lasted about 2 hours.
Are you ready to drive? Do I lie?
He dropped her off around 9:30. Sandra was in a hurry to pick up her son. He watched her get into her car and leave. He hadn't seen or heard from Sandra since.
Thank you.
All right.
Investigators asked Joyner to fill out a scientific content analysis form, referred to as a SCAN questionnaire. Like a polygraph, the questionnaire allows investigators to analyze a person's written responses for signs of deception or inconsistencies.
The SCAN questionnaire is a written form that we give people that ask people pointed questions and ask them to respond in their own writing. So it gives us a way to do an informal interview that sometimes reveals a lot about the information that the person's given.
Investigators analyzed Joyner's statements. Using the information to reconstruct Sandra's movements prior to her disappearance, Lieutenant Cutler quickly found a troubling inconsistency.
Part of his statement was that he had let her off at the apartment and she'd gotten into her car and left. Well, her car was still there, and the neighbors said no, nobody came there that night. So that leads us to believe that that part of the story was not true.
Though police had no motive and no direct evidence that a crime had been committed, they obtained a warrant to search Joyner's residence. But the search turned up nothing. Investigators knew they needed to look past the obvious. They collected ordinary household items, including a trash bag from Joyner's kitchen dotted with stains that appeared to be blood. Tests later showed, however, that the substance was not of human origin. Having found no hard evidence linking Joyner to Sandra's disappearance, the investigation threatened to go cold.
Canvases of where she lived. Well, certainly they're looking grim. Unfortunately, we still don't know how to assess them. We suspect that some foul plays happened. We've seen cases where people take off and vanish for reasons that nobody knows about, and they come back. We were certainly concerned that this was not a good situation and that we were going to find her dead.
On April 15, 1992, a month and a half after Sandra Hernandez was reported missing, their worst fears were confirmed. A farmer in nearby LaGrange County, Indiana, made a gruesome discovery: the body of a young woman.
1023 the location.
Okay, Claire, we're just a couple minutes away.
As investigators in Elkhart, Indiana, continued searching for 25-year-old Sandra Hernandez, they received a call from police in nearby LaGrange County. A body matching Sandra's description had been found in an isolated field. A black trash bag covering the victim's head was removed and preserved as evidence. Using photographs, investigators confirmed that Sandra Hernandez had finally been found. Police began scouring the scene for any useful evidence, but nothing that could help them identify a suspect was found. After an exhaustive search of the area, it appeared that Sandra's killer had been careful not to leave any trace of evidence behind. At autopsy, the medical examiner determined that Sandra had died of asphyxiation, resulting from manual strangulation. An analysis of the victim's stomach contents indicated that she had been murdered within an hour after eating. The medical examiner's analysis made Ricky Joyner's alibi impossible. Sandra could not have gone to a 2-hour movie after eating dinner with Joyner, as he had previously claimed.
Has anybody been in their house yet?
But to prove murder, investigators knew they needed more than a few inconsistencies in Joyner's story. They had to come up with hard evidence to tie Joyner to the crime scene. But all they had was the trash bag recovered from Joyner's apartment.
The trash bag turns out to have the most significance of anything that's taken. The trash bag that's found on the corpse, when the state police tech decide to look at the evidence, send it to the lab, they talk to our techs, and they decide, hey, we've got this bag from Joyner, the suspect's apartment. Let's send it to the lab with the bag we found on the corpse, just to have them look at it.
The bags were sent to forensic examiner John Vanderkolk at the Indiana State Police Crime Lab. Though it seemed like a long shot, Vanderkolk was asked to determine if the bag recovered from the victim and the bag seized from Joyner's apartment could have come from the same piece of plastic. To begin his analysis, Vanderkolk began by looking for repeatable class characteristics.
The repeatable class characteristics would be the cutting tool that would use to cut the bags apart, the size and shape of the bag, the general color of the bag, the dimensions of the bag, and any feature of the bag that can be repeated by the manufacturing process.
By shining a light through the evidence, Van der Kolk determined that random color variations, microscopic impurities, and stretch marks were consistent between the bags. He continued his analysis by comparing the bags end to end. Van der Kolk found that the unique tool marks made as the bags were separated during manufacturing corresponded between the top of one of the bags and the bottom of the other. He was certain that the two bags had originated from the same piece of plastic, and in fact, they had come from the same roll.
I was convinced by the random pigment variation that carried over from one bag to the other, and also the random impurities and the stretch marks generated off the impurities that carried over from one bag to the other directly across the cut separation. The randomness definitely carried over throughout the circumference of the bottom of the bag from Sandra Hernandez's head and the top of the bag that Elkhart Police Department had recovered from Ricky Joyner's house.
With no way to explain how a trash bag from his apartment ended up around the victim's head, Ricky Joyner was arrested and charged with the murder of Sandra Hernandez. Police surmised that after going out to dinner together, Sandra went with Joyner to his residence. But something went wrong. After a violent struggle, Joyner strangled Sandra to death. Police theorized that before putting her body into his car, he covered Sandra's head with a trash bag to keep traces of blood from being left behind. He then drove his victim to nearby LaGrange County. He placed her in the isolated field and left her there. After extensive legal proceedings, a jury found Ricky Joyner guilty of the murder of Sandra Hernandez. He was sentenced to 60 years in prison. Ricky Joyner believed that an ordinary trash bag would cover up his crime. Other killers will go to even greater lengths to conceal their guilt. Nestled in the Tennessee River Valley, the city of Decatur, Alabama clings to a rich and colorful past. Its laid-back southern charm and its reputation as a fishing haven attract thousands of sportsmen each year. But in 1988, the river attracted a different kind of visitor. On July 5th, a fisherman called Decatur police after stumbling upon a body dressed in a nightgown and a blue pajama top near the shoreline. Police could determine that the body was female, but little else. The victim had been decapitated. After securing the area, investigators began the task of processing the scene for clues that could tell them who this victim was. They knew that because she had been decapitated, her identity would be the key to exposing this killer. The crime scene had little to offer. Blood-spattered rocks on the path and drag marks in the overgrowth led detectives to conclude that the victim had been killed elsewhere and then brought to the river. There were no signs of tire tracks or anything else that could help police identify the killer. With only the victim's fingerprints to work with, Sergeant John Boyd of the Decatur Police Department began trying to put a name to the Jane Doe.
And from those fingerprints, we tried a number of agencies to see if we could make an identification. We tried through here, we tried through Huntsville, and we couldn't get anything.
To expand the search, the prints were cataloged and then forwarded to the FBI, whose national fingerprint database might yield better results. In the meantime, investigators hoped an autopsy could tell them more about how this victim died. Determining the exact cause of death would be difficult. But the medical examiner did find a few faint ligature marks below where the head had been severed, indicating that the victim had been strangled before being decapitated with a dull cutting tool. The pajama top and nightgown worn by the victim were collected and forwarded to the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences. There, trace evidence examiner John Kilbourne began processing the clothes for any potential clues.
We use a method that we call taping, where we take cellophane tape and using the sticky or adhesive surface of the tape, we press it down on the clothing, and what this does is collect any particles, hairs, fibers, or other particles from the surface of that clothing.
Kilbourne found a substantial number of hairs and assorted red and black synthetic fibers that had clung to the victim's clothing. Having more than 20 years' experience analyzing similar evidence from crime scenes, Kilbourne believed he knew their origin.
Some of the fibers were unusual in that the fibers had adhesive on them, some type of glue on the surface. I have had other cases similar that had fibers similar to this, and in each of these cases it turned out to be adhesive from a felt car mat in the trunk mat, and I felt like in looking at these fibers we're looking at possibly this victim having been in the trunk of a car.
But until examiners had a source of comparison, the value of these items on their own would remain limited. 3 days later, police believed they got their first break. Fishermen had reported finding a human head floating near the shoreline. The area was less than a mile from where Jane Doe's body had been discovered.
It had been decaying, obviously, at least 3 days. It was an overwhelming stench. The head was in a severe state of decomposition. We had extreme difficulty in even picking it up to get it inside the boat. We finally had to get enough plastic bags and bag it up and put it on ice, and put it in a styrofoam cooler and put it on ice and carried it down to the forensic lab.
But prolonged exposure to the elements made it impossible for examiners to find any identifiable features. Frustrated by the lack of progress, police realized that until they could find a way to identify the decapitated woman, this case would likely remain unsolved. Police in Decatur, Alabama were making little progress in identifying a headless female victim pulled from the banks of the Tennessee River. Over the next 10 days, investigators scoured through dozens of missing persons reports in an effort to learn the victim's identity. But none matched the description of their Jane Doe. The case threatened to go unsolved. But on July 15th, they got a break. Searching through military files, the FBI found a fingerprint match with the victim. Jane Doe was identified as 32-year-old Sandra Gale Leslie, formerly enlisted in the United States Air Force. Records indicated that she currently lived in Nashville, Tennessee, 120 miles away from where she was found. police jumped on the lead.
On that same day, after we learned who she was, we contacted Nashville Metro authorities and found out that they did in fact have a missing person report on Mrs. Leslie.
Police learned that Sandra Leslie had been reported missing by her husband 2 days after her body was discovered in Alabama. Decatur police traveled to Tennessee and teamed up with Nashville authorities.
Referring to female friend or male friend?
Their first visit was to Sandra Leslie's husband. 39-year-old Billy Leslie told police that his marriage to Sandra had been shaky. But he loved his wife of almost 10 years and said they were trying to work out their problems. A few days before her disappearance, the couple dropped off their 2 kids with relatives in an effort to spend more time alone together. But on the afternoon of July 4th, Billy returned home from running errands to find that Sandra and her clothes were gone.
Hello? Hey, how you doing?
He said that in the weeks before her disappearance, Sandra had received numerous unexplained phone calls. Afterward, she would often leave the house with no explanation, leaving Billy to take care of the kids. He was convinced she was having an affair, though he didn't know with whom. As a matter of routine, police asked if they could look around. Billy gave his consent. To their surprise, investigators immediately found inconsistencies with his statements.
Mark. All right.
Sergeant Robert Moore of the Nashville Police Department took part in the search.
He said she took her clothes with her. The closet was so full of clothes you couldn't put another blouse in it. There was no room for anything else. Dresser drawers, her clothes are gone, but yet every drawer was full. I mean, it just didn't look like somebody had moved out.
Though Billy couldn't explain the discrepancy, he insisted that he would never hurt his wife, and he certainly had nothing to do with her murder. He agreed to let forensic technicians process his living room. Luminol was applied to the floor. But investigators found no traces of blood or any other signs of violence. But there were indications that the residence had been thoroughly cleaned recently.
Maybe we bring the house light
Despite
on.
the lack of evidence, investigators suspected that Billy Leslie was hiding something. Police began interviewing friends and neighbors. One neighbor claimed that Billy and Sandra fought often. Just a few days before Sandra disappeared, she heard what she described as a knockdown, drag-out fight coming from outside her window. When she looked outside, she saw Billy screaming at Sandra. As the fight escalated, Billy became physically abusive toward his wife. The neighbor didn't recall seeing Sandra after that night. She just assumed Sandra had finally decided to leave Billy. Perhaps that's exactly what Billy Leslie wanted everyone to believe.
Come in, just have a
One of
seat
Sandra's
here,
friends told police that Sandra had recently filed for divorce, and as a result, Billy had become increasingly violent toward her.
I think, first of all,
So much so that just before her death, Sandra decided to change the beneficiary of her life insurance policy.
We're working with the people in Decatur, Alabama. Billy?
Prior to the change, Billy Leslie stood to gain $150,000 from Sandra's death.
She had feared for her life, and she changed the beneficiary of that insurance policy to her brother in California, and specifically asked him to make sure her children were taken care of should anything happen to her.
In the same area.
Billy wasn't informed that he was no longer the beneficiary. For investigators, a possible motive for murder was beginning to emerge. Billy Leslie, as far as he knew, had a lot to gain from his wife's death. But so far, their case was only circumstantial. Later that evening, police obtained a warrant to search Billy's car, possibly used to transport Sandra's body to Alabama. Luminol was applied to the trunk. Investigators found an overwhelming amount of substance that appeared to be blood. Billy Leslie explained he had gone fishing recently and put his catch into the trunk. The trunk mat was collected and sent back to the Decatur Crime Lab for a more thorough forensic examination. While waiting for the test results, investigators continued to build their case. Hoping to find witnesses that could put Billy near the crime scene, police released details of the murder to the media in Alabama. A few days later, the tactic paid off. A Decatur resident remembered having a conversation with a man at a convenience store a few hours before Sandra's body was discovered. He had asked where to find a good fishing spot. The woman directed him to an area half a mile away. It was the same location where the victim was found.
What time of day?
She was shown a photo lineup.
Well, I was in the convenience store at 3 in the morning on Saturday.
She had no idea who the suspect on the photo lineup was, but she was able to immediately point to Billy Leslie and say, "This is the guy. This is the guy that was here," and asked me about a place to fish.
The witness testimony put Billy Leslie just a half a mile away from the crime scene on the day of the murder, and investigators had no doubt that he was responsible for his wife's death. Now, they hoped the crime lab would provide irrefutable proof. Authorities were closing in on Billy Leslie, the man they believed responsible for the decapitation of his wife, Sandra. Though their case was largely circumstantial, they hoped a trunk mat collected from the suspect's car could physically link him to the homicide. After serological tests determined that the blood found on the trunk mat was not fish blood, as Billy Leslie claimed, Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences trace analyst John Kilborn began analyzing dozens of hairs and fibers recovered from the mat. Using a comparison microscope, he began looking for common characteristics between samples from the trunk mat and those recovered from the clothes Sandra Leslie had been wearing. The color, texture, and cross-sectional shape of the fibers matched.
We found a number of fibers from the victim's clothing that were consistent to the some of the known fibers from the trunk mat, as well as some foreign fibers that were in the trunk mat. So we were able to show a link between the fibers and the hairs out of the vehicle to the victim herself.
Sandra Leslie's body had been in the trunk of that car. And the only other person known to have driven the vehicle was her husband, Billy. Billy Leslie was arrested and charged with the murder of his wife, Sandra. Police theorized that Billy Leslie believed he had much to gain from killing his wife before their divorce was finalized. On July 4th, 1988, after a heated argument, Billy made the decision to kill his wife. After strangling Sandra, he loaded her into the trunk of their car and set out to dispose of the body on the banks of the Tennessee River in Decatur, Alabama. Not realizing that her fingerprints were on file with the military, Billy believed that separating the head from the body would make identification impossible. In December of 1989, Billy Wayne Leslie was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Even in death, Sandra Leslie managed to leave behind clues that pointed to her killer's identity. But in some cases, investigators have no idea where the evidence will lead them. The quiet, middle-class neighborhood of Lake Grove, New York, is a haven of suburban life. The community's illusion of serenity, however, was unable to provide protection from tragedy. On April 7, 1994, police and paramedics were dispatched to the home of 47-year-old Stuart Kovacs. Kovacs said that Irene, his wife of more than 20 years, was inside, dead. He believed she had killed herself by jumping off the second-floor balcony. Not wanting to contaminate the scene, the officer allowed only one paramedic into the house. Inside, 45-year-old Irene Kovacs' lifeless body was lying on the floor, covered with a towel. Her hair was wet, indicating she had recently showered. The paramedic noted bruising on the victim and a cut lip. An empty container of gasoline additive lay nearby. A large quantity of the substance was found pooled in the victim's mouth. It appeared that Irene Kovacs had poisoned herself and then jumped or fell from the second-floor balcony. Stuart Kovacs said that while working in the garage, he cut himself on a power tool. Going inside to get a Band-Aid, he discovered his wife on the floor. Panicked, he called 911 and then went upstairs to the bedroom to get a towel to cover her and to clean up his wound. On the couple's bed, he discovered a suicide note tucked underneath the family Bible. As a matter of routine protocol, homicide investigators were dispatched to the scene. Armed with a video camera, the team made their way into the residence. Almost immediately, they were struck by the victim's appearance. Lieutenant John Girash of the Suffolk County Police Department explains.
It's somewhat unusual that a woman would want herself to be discovered not dressed. In and of itself, that is not proof of anything other than suicide, but it is one of the circumstances that we take into account as we investigate.
After removing the body, police continued examining the scene. On the second-floor landing, they found a piece of recently dented sheetrock on the wall about ankle height, as though it had recently been kicked in anger, or perhaps a struggle. Unsure of its significance, the area, along with the rest of the scene, was thoroughly photographed. A short while later, after learning of his mother's death, the Kovacs' 19-year-old son came in to speep with detectives.
The reason we have
He said that the situation at home had grown tense in recent months.
It was just, he had probable cause to think so. He found it.
His parents' divorce was due to be finalized soon, and his dad had become increasingly abusive, often exploding into a rage over nothing. In one recent incident, Stuart Kovacs returned home early from work and confronted Irene with a note he had found that had been sent to her by a business associate. Though Irene denied any wrongdoing, Stuart accused her of having an affair and began threatening her with violence. Suffolk County homicide detective Robert Doyle.
The Kovacs children indicated to us that there was a very, very poor relationship at home, that apparently Irene Kovacs was in tremendous fear of Stu Kovacs. He abused her mentally, probably more so than physically. It was a real hellish situation to be children in that particular home.
The son added that on the night before his mother's death, she had seemed normal and happy, not at all depressed or suicidal. For investigators, the routine suicide investigation had raised more questions than answers. Irene Kovacs just didn't seem a likely candidate for suicide. Now, police realized that the circumstances surrounding this tragedy demanded a closer look. Though it appeared that 45-year-old Irene Kovacs had poisoned herself and then jumped off the second-floor balcony of her home, police in Lake Grove, New York were not convinced. A few hours after her body was discovered, police returned to the residence with a warrant. Now they were searching for evidence that Irene's husband, Stuart Kovacs, had murdered her. Forensic examiner Robert Jenna was asked to assist in the search.
The fact that we have somebody claiming that this is a suicide, the husband, and the pieces of the puzzle just don't seem to fit a suicide, you now have to focus strongly on the physical evidence to try to either show that it was in fact a suicide or show that it was in fact something other than a suicide.
To disprove the suicide story, police searched for evidence of a violent struggle. And though Kovacs blamed a deep cut to his finger on a power tool accident, police speculated it could also be explained by a blow to a sharp object, like a tooth. But traces of Stuart Kovacs' blood were found exactly where he insisted the accident took place. The search continued inside the home. In the couple's second-floor bathroom, police found traces of blood on the commode lid. A washcloth found in the sink also appeared to be blood-stained. Kovacs said the blood had come from his injured finger. Investigators collected the evidence. In the bedroom, an officer recovered the suicide note found earlier by Stuart Kovacs. Even though the writing was identified as Irene's, a close inspection of the language caught investigators' attention.
What he purported to be a suicide note was in fact some writings of Irene Kovacs that really had nothing to do with suicide at all. She was talking about her life, she was talking about various things that she was going through personally in her life. At no point did that particular note indicate or suggest that she was going to commit suicide.
Unsure what to make of the evidence, police hoped Irene herself could give them answers. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was blunt force trauma to Irene's head and chest. But he could not rule out that the injuries occurred as a result of the fall from the second floor. Blood and tissue samples were collected and forwarded to the Suffolk County Crime Lab. There, toxicologists began analyzing the samples for the presence of the alcohol methanol, the main compound used in gasoline additives like the one Irene allegedly swallowed. First, examiners analyzed Irene's blood samples by using a gas chromatograph, an apparatus that separates complex mixtures into individual compounds. The analysis of the blood confirmed that fatal amounts of methanol were present. Toxicologist Ed Briglia of the Suffolk County Crime Lab continued the analysis on the tissue samples.
Subsequent to that finding, we analyzed other specimens that we received, primarily gastric contents, intestinal contents, and esophageal contents. Those specimens revealed no methanol to be present, which was totally contrary to the notion that Mrs. Kovacs could have consumed methanol shortly before her death. The reason this is the case is that it takes a period of time, anywhere from a minimum of approximately 1 hour upwards to approximately 4 to 5 hours, for the alcohol to be removed from the stomach.
For methanol to be found in the blood but not in the tissues told examiners that the gas additive had been absorbed through Irene's skin, not ingested through her mouth. She never swallowed the gas additive. To make sense of the findings, police turned back to forensic examiner Robert Jenna. Using photographs and diagrams from the scene, Jenna found a clue. There were portions of Irene's body lying underneath the second-floor landing. It was unlikely that she came to rest in that position after falling over the railing. And Stuart Kovacs claimed he never touched Irene's body. And there was something else. One of the photographs revealed that the gas additive stains on the floor formed an outline of Irene's body.
In order to get this type of pattern, the victim would have to have been lying down in this position when the material was deposited on her, as opposed to her falling from the top landing, already having the material in her system. So it was consistent with her being in this position, lying on her back, the liquid deposited on her face and body, causing this outline that led us to believe that this particular case was not a suicide, but a homicide. The outline that was
coupled with the toxicologist's findings, the evidence showed that the gas additive had been poured into Irene's mouth while she was already dead or dying on the floor. To make their case, police still needed proof of a struggle. Examiners performed DNA tests on the various blood samples collected from the couple's bathroom, believed to have been left by Stuart's cut finger. But the analysis disproved Stuart Kovacs' story. All of the blood found in the bathroom had come from Irene. That proved that she had been bleeding prior to the fall from the balcony. For investigators, it was proof that Irene Kovacs had not taken her own life, but that Stuart Kovacs had taken it from her. With a warrant in hand, police quickly tracked down Stuart Kovacs as he returned home from work. He was taken into custody and booked for murder. Investigators believe that after beating Irene as she got out of the shower, Stuart Kovacs forced her over the balcony. After pouring the gas additive into her mouth to make her death look like a suicide, he smeared blood from a cut sustained during the assault on the power tool in the garage. On December 17, 1996, Stuart Kovacs was found guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. Some killers will stop at nothing to conceal their crimes.
These are
when there are no human observers to a murder, investigators must look for a different kind of witness to reveal a killer's identity. They turn to the crime lab, where forensic examiners can uncover the truth by turning the smallest clue into a silent witness.